This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff starts the show as he explains what crop pests he is already keeping an eye out for and if it is common for them to be out at this time of year. Tina Sullivan, K-State Extension agronomist, continues the show as she recognizes the concerns surrounding dead or damaged brome fields from fall armyworms. Ending the show is K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk as he encourages producers, when possible, to increase the use of crops requiring less water, as it accounts for a large percentage of an operation's water use. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Tuesday show talking about the current state of insects with K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff. Anthony, thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. Hello, Shelby.
Anthony, as we overall look at insects in Kansas, what are you seeing?
Well, I'm seeing a variety of insects already active, not necessarily insects that would be considered agricultural pests yet. But there are a lot of other just incidental insects that are already showing activity. I've been seeing butterflies, flies, beetles, all kinds of things that are active due to this warmer than normal weather we've been having. These ups and downs, especially the larger ups and downs, have a lot of things active. And I think that can translate easily into some of our agricultural pests may start, if not already are, they may start to be active as well. And so right now I'm of the mind that folks need, if you're going to be out in your field, your wheat field, your triticale, your alfalfa, doing something, stop and scout for insects. I know it probably sounds a little off the wall to start scouting right now. It's pretty early. But given the weather that we've had and the insect activity that I'm seeing overall, I think it would not hurt to be extra vigilant right now, especially for a handful of species that we deal with in the spring.
And what is one of those species that we're going to touch on today?
One of them I wanted to highlight real quick, and this would be one for primarily western Kansas folks to think about. The army cutworm, also known as the miller moth. Of course, they migrated in last fall, laid eggs in all the wheat fields, and those eggs hatched, and there's little caterpillars out there feeding that went dormant over winter. But over winter, when we had our warm snaps and things like that, these little caterpillars can become active and they can feed, and so they can kind of develop and grow during the warm spells of winter. So it's possible that some of these caterpillars got a little bit bigger than normal during the winter, and as we get closer to the spring and we keep having these warm spells, those caterpillars could still be active earlier, growing faster, and so they might be doing more damage earlier than typical going in the spring. So I think if you're out there in your triticale and your wheat in western Kansas, definitely scout for army cutworms. The good thing here is that our trap counts, we do monitor the moth counts coming in the fall and last fall. The total trap counts were below the threshold that indicate elevated caterpillar activity for this spring, but there still could be hot spots. So that's one insect I want to say. If you're out there, go ahead and look for army cutworm and weed and triticale in western Kansas.
And if these army cutworms are starting earlier and getting bigger faster or sooner than is usual, does that mean they're going to have more generations, do more damage? What does that really mean for producers?
Good question. So this particular insect, the army cutworm, also known as the miller moth, only has one generation. So we'll have one flush of caterpillars. They won't all be the same size at the same time and turn into moths at the same time, of course. But we'll only have one, basically, I'd say 2-3 month window of risk from caterpillar feeding before they get big enough to pupate in the soil, emerge as miller moths, bother everybody by getting into their houses and then going back to the Rockies. So just one generation, but if they're growing and feeding earlier, the bigger they get, the more they'll eat faster and the harder they are to control when they get over a half an inch. So if you could catch them and they're at threshold when they're still small, that's when you'd want to make a treatment decision, even if it seems early in the year. If you're at threshold and it seems early, you should still make a decision.
What is that threshold?
It depends on the growth stage of the wheat. If you have a really nicely tillered, lush stand of wheat and the field is not stressed and it's hanging in there, and especially as we get into spring and if it's growing really well, it could tolerate 10 to 12 caterpillars per square foot. So it could tolerate a lot. But if you have a stand of wheat that's real thin, drought stressed, didn't do well in the fall, 1 to 3 caterpillars can really wipe that field out. So you got to take into account the plant status as well as the number of caterpillars out there.
Are you also seeing some aphids a bit earlier than usual?
I would expect aphids potentially could be active earlier with this warmer weather, especially for in fields that were planted earlier. Wheat fields and triticale fields that were planted early last year had a longer window of time to be colonized by aphids, particularly the bird chariot aphid. And so on these warmer days, the bird chariot aphid can become active and start reproducing, and their populations can be a little bit bigger going into spring than typical. And typically, we do not have to spray for aphids in wheat in Kansas. They're controlled by a variety of beneficials, but there are times when weather patterns allow them to get a jump start on the season, and then we could have populations that reach threshold, which also varies by the threshold will vary by the state of the plants, the growth stage of the plants, things like that, which can all be found in our insect pest management guides on the entomology website. But I would say if you're out there, this warmer weather might have those aphids up out of the crown. They'll be usually hiding out in the soil at the crown of the plant, hard to find. But if this warm weather has them up in the plants, they'll be easier to find and scout for. Aphids, might as well look for those while you're out there as well.
So potentially reaching that threshold this year, you think, for growers?
That's hard to predict. I'm just saying that folks should not ignore the possibility.
And something we commonly talk about when we think about entomology and crops in Kansas, alfalfa weevils. Where are you thinking for 2026 growing season? We're going to deal with those.
So alfalfa weevil is definitely something that folks need to be concerned about right now. I was taking a look at the handy alfalfa weevil growing degree calculator that's found on the Kansas University Mesonet website. You go in there and you put in your data for each location, each Mesonet site, and it gives you a number of accumulated growing degree days. And I was taking a look at several sites around the state earlier this morning, and the southern half of Kansas, as far as growing degree days for alfalfa weevil, are way ahead of schedule. There's already damage from larvae occurring in alfalfa fields in southern and even up into south central Kansas because the warm weather has things so ahead of schedule. And so if these fields aren't growing quickly enough to outpace the damage from those larvae, these fields are going to have problems. So folks in southern Kansas need to be scouting for alfalfa weevil larvae right now. For the northern part of the state, I looked at several locations, and growing degree days right now are at normal. To me, there's not a concern right now for larval activity in the northern half of Kansas. But in a couple weeks, as we keep warming up, people are going to want to keep tabs on those growing degree days, and just especially once the crops are growing, if the fields are growing, get out there and scout. But right now, southern Kansas should definitely be on alert for alfalfa weevil larvae.
And as we're chatting right now, what's that last insect you're keeping an eye out for?
So for last insect on my mind, this would also have to do with southern Kansas, and I would say folks should keep an eye out for early emerging grasshoppers. So we have some grasshoppers that typically emerge very early in the spring, particularly the red-legged grasshopper, which can be a crop pest. It's possible, given this warm weather, warmer than normal soil temperatures, those egg masses could be hatching, and we could have nymphal immature grasshoppers already in the environment, and they will be going to anything green. So that means wheat, triticale, alfalfa. So in southern Kansas, folks need to keep an eye out for grasshoppers, and I'd say particularly southwest Kansas as well, because the whole entire western side of Kansas had a massive grasshopper population going into fall last year.
Anthony, you mentioned the red-legged grasshoppers. Are there many different types of grasshoppers in Kansas?
Yeah, actually, there are over 100 species in the state, but people don't realize that only a handful are actual potential major pests, four or five actually out of those hundreds. And red-legged's one of them. And there's three or four more. I can't remember off the top of my head, but these are the species that have the potential for very rapid reproduction and swarming behavior, and they can tend to take over areas of cropland and decimate it very quickly. As opposed to many of the other species of grasshoppers in Kansas, they're very specific to a lot of just native plants, native weedy plants, things like that. They're very generalist. They just graze here and there, and they're not really problems.
For Kansas growers, then, what are the key takeaways you'd really like to have them keep in mind?
Right now, my message I want to make sure everyone's hearing. So we just discussed some insects that we probably would be not worried about for a couple, three more weeks. They should be on our minds now, and I think the message I want folks to really hear is start scouting, scout early, scout often, be proactive, not reactive, because it'll help in the long run.
Anthony, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much.
That was K-State Extension entomologist Anthony Zukoff. He did mention how you can find more information on these pests by checking out the Insect Pest Management Guide. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net, or you can also find it by going to the K-State Extension bookstore, which is Bookstore.ksre.ksu.edu. You can also simply search for the K-State Insect Pest Management Guide. Also, in today's show notes on agtoday.net will be a link to the Mesonet website. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing damaged or dead brome with K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan. Tina, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Shelby.
Tina, as we're looking at the status of brome, what happened in 2025 that makes this something really concerning and important for growers in 2026?
So when we kind of think back to what happened in 2025, we've been kind of getting these years of heavy fall armyworms or lighter fall armyworms. But last year, the fall armyworms started kind of showing up in southeast Kansas in late July, early August, which felt much about a month earlier to some people. And when we had that wet season last year, our brome fields, especially those cool season bromes, got delayed cuts. So we've seen delayed cuts, earlier fall armyworm migration into the state. So when our cool season brome doesn't have enough time to bounce back from cutting, also when it's hot, think about late July, early August, a cool season forage does not like it when it's super hot. It actually tries to go into dormancy. So late cut, not enough time to recover, and then we introduce the fall armyworms. By introducing, I mean they come up from the south. They are a migratory pest. And then we're going to have them until we have a killing frost. So thinking about they arrived in August, really, and we had that really long fall. We didn't really get cold until late October. So we had these multiple generations of fall armyworms that were not just hitting smooth brome, they were hitting tall fescue, they were hitting native forages. And because of just how high those populations were, they hit wheat and other small grains late into the fall. We're seeing this difference in fall armyworms where their preference in their diet are small bladed forages. They're called the rice strain compared to the corn strain, which fall armyworms tended to be more of a corn and sorghum insect, and we've seen this shift over. So now the question is becoming, is my brome stand alive or is it not?
How can growers see if their brome stand is alive?
I wish I had a real scientific method of going into doing this. The reality is we need you to go into the field. If you're just passing by the field, even though we've been a bit warmer this spring than historical times, you still need to get into that field and look at the forage itself, because it could be a little bit deceiving and you could actually have some dead annuals in that forage, like foxtail, compared to the brome that we are hoping wakes up soon. With this being early March, yes, we've had the right temperatures, Some parts of the state have been relatively dry in the east where we grow most of our brome, so it's going to take more time to wake up. It needs moisture, but also smooth brome and tall fescue are cool season grasses. They don't just wake up because the temperatures are the correct temps. We also need to correct day length or night length. But what we can do to check our stands is go to the field, dig up some of like what would be believed to be that brome plant. If the roots seem alive, they should be holding soil to them. That plant should come out of dormancy. If you dig it up and there's really nothing holding, if it all kind of looks really dry and brittle, the likeliness of it bouncing back is less. It's not a hard line, and that's something we're actually trying to work on going into this season, is to gather more data of why brome stands, some recover and some don't.
And when you're seeing these brome stands, are you feeling like it's small patches in the field, or the whole brome field is gone if the fall armyworms got there?
Some fields we have seen where it is a patchy, you could basically see where the fall armyworms, they did their march. And then there's other fields, the whole field is gone. Some fields got hit numerous times, even though the field turned brown, and they still got hit again and again because we had about 4 generations last year, because the fall armyworm, their life cycle is about 30 days, and we can have overlapping life cycles. Plus, they continue to come up from the south. So it's just, we can have these just overlapping populations, and they can continue doing their damage until we get that killing frost. We have to remember that, right? So the longer we have these open falls, the more potential to damage we have.
For growers with fields that are dead or damaged, what are some management options if they're wanting to get brome back in that field?
So we kind of start thinking about what's our replant options for our cool season window for a lot of the eastern side of states. March 15th, that's really our cutoff time for replanting those cool seasons, because again, if it gets much later into the season, we're not going to have enough time for them to bounce up before it gets too hot on them. So if your stand is dead and you miss this March-ish window, you can do, a fall replant. And that's when you can really determine if that stand is dead. If you think your stand is okay, you might just be able to thicken it back up with a plant like a interseeding. And again, with this window shutting pretty quickly for a lot of eastern Kansas, you may want to look into something like a summer annual like Sorghum Sudex. It's really hard to determine on some of these stands, is it going to bounce back? Is it not? Without just being a bit patient. And with us being patient, though, we lose those replant windows.
How long does it take to see that stand be established?
Depends. If we don't get the right moisture, we've seen spring stands fail, we've seen fall stands fail, just because we have such a narrow window when we need to get the seed planted and get moisture. There's parts of the state right now that are under at least one level of drought. Hopefully we get some precip to help with that. Some years we see a spring plant do really well, fall plant do really well. We see neither do well. So it's very weather dependent.
What is a seeding rate that is recommended?
If we're going to be doing a cool season replacement, such as a brome or a fescue, we're still saying 10 to 15 pounds of pure live seed. If we're drilling, if you're going to go in with a broadcast, you need to bump that up to 20, almost 25 pounds of pure live seed. And at seed prices right now, it's really hard to justify that. So wait and see. Sometimes it's the method to go. Sometimes we're just going to go in and thicken it up, because the last thing we truly want to do is have a brome stand be dead and it turn into a weedy mess, because it can happen pretty quickly when we think about those annuals coming in to take advantage of no competition.
So if people do choose to wait and see, and unfortunately there is no field coming up, do they need to look into weed management for that field?
It is more than likely they need to, especially if they're going to try to plant some kind of summer annual. I mentioned sorghum Sudan or sorghum Sudex. We also have crabgrass, which I know a lot of people don't like crabgrass, but crabgrass is a warm season grass option. We also have something like pearl millet. We do have some summer annual options that do give us a grazing season. They might not be super productive, but it's something to help compete with those weeds as well until we can get into the fall time, then to get that cool season reestablished. If we're thinking of going into a native forage mix, just remember they're not fall armyworm resistant. We just see different damage levels in them. And it takes much longer to get a native forage stand established, closer to 5 years of babying it pretty consistently.
From your perspective as an agronomist, Tina, do you have concerns for fall armyworms for this year?
So with a migratory pest, I cannot sound the alarm early. All I can say is historically, we've had them show up in late July, all the way through September as their first arrival. I will say we will do our best this year. We have a trapping network. They do not bring them into the state at all. It's not how a trapping network works, but it's more of a monitoring system to see when the moths arrive. Typically, if the moths arrive, that means we're probably going to have the first set of eggs hatching within about a week. And again, it's not the moth doing the damage. All they're doing is laying their eggs. It's their babies. It's the larvae who are doing the damage. So please pay attention to the Agronomy e-update. That's when we kind of put out those, hey, fall armyworms have been spotted in the state. Please, please, please monitor your fields. Each year is different.
Tina, what are your key takeaways for growers when it comes to damaged or dead brome and fall armyworms?
So don't lose all hope. In September 2024, I went to some fields. We thought they were gone. We went in April. The brome was back. It was a good fertilized field, had a lot of good management, so that might have been what drove some of that recovery. So thinking about fertilizer timing in some of those fields, maybe if you've been ticking low into your pH, below that 6, going in towards a 5, that brome might just not have as much residual in those root zones because it's not been living in its ideal pH range to have as much bounce back. If you were maybe one of those later cuttings and then you still got hit with fall armyworms, I'm not saying you're a complete loss. Again, because I've seen each stand act a little differently. Just don't lose faith, but maybe lose faith. It's hard. Each stand, every field was hit differently. Can I guarantee you will or will not get hit this coming year? No, it's a migratory pest, and each year they're going to act differently. So think about your cutting time. I know it's very weather dependent sometimes, but cutting time, cutting height, we want to give that forage the best ability to bounce back before we go into the really hot summer. Because when it gets really hot, cool season forages, brome and tall fescue, shut down. They go to sleep until it cools back off. But that leaves them the most susceptible to fall armyworms. And if we cut too low, the fall armyworms go right through the crown. They are not eating the roots. And with it being a grass, that was its growing point. If the growing point is gone, it cannot recover.
Tina, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
That was K-State Extension agronomist Tina Sullivan. I will link an e-update article titled Options for Damaged or Dead Brome Hayfields in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Water is the most essential nutrient for dairy operations. In most operations, crop irrigation accounts for about 90% of total water use. With water conservation continuing to be a major concern in Kansas and nationally, K-State dairy expert Mike Brouk encourages producers, whenever possible, to increase their use of crops that require less water, such as small grains in the winter. He says this will allow current dairy operations to continue and expand their operations in the future.
Today I'd like to visit with our Kansas dairy producers concerning the most essential nutrient that you have on your dairy farm, actually for your total dairy operation, and that's called water. As we look across our dairy industry, whether we look here in Kansas, we look to the south, we look to the north, water issues are becoming more and more of a concern for our industry as we look into the future. Yes, we've always had some concerns here in Kansas, and we have great water regulations that regulate the amount that we pump every year. But we're going to have to look beyond where we're at today to where we need to be in the years to come so that we can continue dairy operations and expand operations that we currently have. So what are some things that we need to be thinking about as dairy farmers? Well, number one, we need to think about where does most of the water go that is actually used in dairy production. It's actually used to irrigate crops. See, over 90% of the total water that we use in a dairy operation is actually utilized to grow the crops to feed the cows. So as we look at ways to reduce water usage and conserve water, we really do need to look deep into what we're expending in terms of irrigation water to grow crops. So some things that you might want to think about. We do have certain crops that would utilize less water. When you think about some of the small grains that we could raise over the winter months, or you think about things like sorghum, they do require less water than corn silage. Now, how would you utilize this in your diet? And you really need to work with your nutritionist on this. You probably don't want to come in with a diet that, for lactating cows, that contains all sorghum silage. Our research would show that that really is not a very positive thing when it comes to looking at milk production. However, can you utilize some sorghum silage in your diets of your lactating cows, and can you utilize more in the diets of dry cows and heifers that you might be raising? This will reduce the demand for corn silage and reduce the water demand that we have to raise corn silage. That will, in total, reduce our total dependence on water to raise crops for this dairy herd. So, as you think about your planting decisions, and no, you don't want to convert everything in the first year, but you might want to be taking a look at how you could utilize some of these other crops. Small grains raised over the winter, or possibly sorghum raised during the summer in your dairy operation. Again, you need to work with your nutritionist to determine where these crops would fit best and at what levels, and that'll help you determine how much you actually need to grow and feed. Is it going to increase the complication to your feeding program? Of course, as you're going to be dealing with some additional feeds, and you're going to have to work out the amount that you'd be feeding every day and try to figure out how we were going to remove the correct amounts from silos, and that might require that we construct some different forage storage structures, or we might need to use some silage bags for some of those crops. We're not going to be using it in as high a rate as corn silage. However, these are all discussions that need to be had. It's important that as we look at our future in the dairy industry, that we consider how water might limit our ability to feed cows as well as produce milk here in the High Plains. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.